The Republicans are on the brink of doing something really, really stupid, cutting healthcare and making stuff more expensive for working people while giving more money to the folks signing their paychecks. Trump is compensating the family of a deceased January 6th rioter while continuing to ignore the police officers that were injured that day. Kristi Noem learned what habeas corpus was this week, and she only got it about 100% wrong when asked. Marco Rubio is having a career year when it comes to bootlicking and knee bending. President Biden's cancer diagnosis is terrible news for those of us who care about him, but on the right, it's fresh political fodder, and we'll talk about how you should respond to that stuff. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, let's start with an exchange in the House of Representatives involving Representative Boyle, just laying out who stands to gain or win from this GOP tax bill that's making its way through committees.
The director of the Congressional Budget Office, and I'm looking at this chart here about who benefits from this bill. It doesn't seem to match what Chairwoman Fox and Mr. Arrington are just talking about right now. You want to comment on this?
What that chart shows, and by the way, that's not my chart.
Yeah, I know.
That's not your chart.
CBO's.
That is the official scorekeeper's chart, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. And if you can show that chart again, what it shows is the poor get poorer while the rich get richer. And so let me quote again from the CBO, specifically their numbers. For people in the bottom 10%, they will experience a 4% loss of household wealth. Meanwhile, for people in the top 10%, they will see their household resources increase by 2%. It is as simple as that.
Yeah, that seems, one, par for the course for Republican ideology, and two, like pretty bad politics, Ravi.
Yeah, Trump, it's been hard to follow Trump here. There's all this reporting that he has basically followed Hawley's lead and said protect Medicaid. But then there are clips like this where I'm not exactly sure where he stands. Let's go to this clip.
Supporting the fraud and abuse for Medicaid. If you find waste or fraud or abuse, we want to strengthen Medicaid. We want to strengthen Medicare. Waste, fraud, and abuse. The Democrats will let illegals be on. They'll destroy it. It will be destroyed. They want to have illegal immigrants be on. And if you do that, because it wasn't designed for that. Waste, fraud, and abuse.
Can you guarantee that your voters will support you in the election?
Well, we also had a lot to say about food stamps. Let's go to that clip.
You campaigned on lowering the price of groceries. How can you justify cutting food assistance in this bill?
Let me just tell you, the cut is going to give everybody much more food because prices are coming way down. Groceries are down. Eggs. You told me about eggs. You asked me a question about eggs my first week. You said eggs. I said, I just got here. Tell me about eggs. And it was going through the roof. You know that eggs now way down. Everybody's buying eggs. Groceries down. Energy's down. Gasoline is now they're buying gasoline now for $1.99. If you look back, you'll see $3.50, $4. This country, we're going to lose this country. Our country now is respected all over the world. All over the world we're respected. We were a laughingstock.
So, just so we're clear, like the move here is say a thing that is just made up, which is prices are coming way down, which to my knowledge, that's not the case.
Yeah, I think eggs came down from that one high because there was something specific going on with eggs. But my understanding is that food prices are actually going up.
Right. So we just say something and pretend it's true. And then just pivot to the idea that this other thing that you're not actually doing, but let's say this other thing you're doing, it makes the bad thing go away. So the question was, what are you going to do about food prices given that you are taking away food assistance for poor people? And his answer is, well, it's going to help make food more affordable because the price of gas is lower than it was, so therefore giving people less money to buy food will help them afford food. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, the part about Medicaid, there's some truth to what he's saying. I mean, obviously he's saying it in a like in as
talking point.
general a way as possible. But
Yeah.
depending on where you are, undocumented immigrants can access certain Medicaid funds. There's like a sort of general ban on this happening, but certain states like New York allow seniors 65 and older to access Medicaid. There's emergency Medicaid aid. So like there's something there, and Trump is adept at playing the politics of this kind of stuff. So you can imagine if he calls that fraud and abuse, giving it to undocumented immigrants, and he focuses on that, then, it's easy to see these clips and be like, he's cutting Medicaid. I think there is probably some room for consistency between what he just said and what Holly is outlining, because Holly is writing his op-ed because he wants rural whites to get Medicaid, not undocumented immigrants. So my bet here on the politics is that Trump basically follows Holly's line. There aren't going to be, like, who knows, but my guess would be they protect the core of Medicaid. They don't make like sort of huge cuts, but they start to go after certain subpopulations that aren't GOP voters.
Well, I certainly hope that they do protect the core of Medicaid. Generally, the whole waste, fraud, and abuse claim in Medicaid is sort of a distraction. In most cases, the way the Republicans usually talk about it. It's not to say that there isn't any waste, fraud, and abuse, but what they never say when they talk about the waste or the abuse or the fraud is that the vast majority of it is done by providers. It's very rare because it's very hard to abuse Medicaid as a user, as a customer. Like it's very hard. Like you don't get compensated. It's not like you get a check from Medicaid if you go get a procedure or something like that. But there is a record of abuse by doctors who will overbill Medicaid and that sort of thing, and then they get paid more. But they never say that, right? Because they don't want to be opposite doctors. They just act as if Medicaid is the same as like, getting a check from the government and claiming something that didn't actually happen. So that's sort of their way around it. It's important to call them out on it.
Well, let's go to this clip of Mayor Pete here giving us like a call to action on how to talk about this with people in your lives.
While the president was with congressional Republicans today, they are working on a major piece of legislation. And here's 3 of the things that it would do. 1, add trillions of dollars to the national debt. 2, cut taxes for the wealthy. And 3, kick millions of Americans off of Medicaid. So this is a good time to reach out to your member of Congress and ask them if they're going to keep the promises that they made earlier this year not to cut Medicaid. This bill is bad policy no matter which part of the political spectrum you come from. Most conservatives I know hate the idea of adding trillions of dollars to the national debt. Most liberals I know are especially troubled by the idea of more tax cuts for the wealthy. And most Americans I know understand that kicking millions of people in this country off their health care is just wrong. Our country can do so much better. And it starts by demanding that this Congress put together a budget that actually reflects the values of the American people.
Simple enough. Anything else on this budget, Jason, before we move on to the historic day of January 6th, which never seems to go away?
I think 2 things about it. One, I think we're going to get some wins out of this in the sense that we're going to get some concessions. We're going to force them to not do some things that they wanted to do. And I think it's important for people to talk about it so that it doesn't just get remembered as, Trump passed this budget and this is what happened. Like we need to be very loud about what the Democrats forced Trump to do or forced the Republicans not to do. How much that affects midterm elections that are going to take place over a year from now, I'm not sure, but it's the beginning of a narrative that's going to matter a lot during those elections.
Yeah, it would be hard to imagine him not getting the GOP to do whatever he wants them to do based on how they react. But, there is a slim majority in the House, so he doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver here. Well, let's talk about January 6th here. Two pieces of news came out this week related to January 6th. The first is that Ashley Babbitt, who was shot while breaking into the U.S. Capitol, has received a $5 million settlement from the federal government. Let's go to this clip from Jamie Raskin.
In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, "I think the police officer did his job." Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioters' family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President, a plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages, end quote.
So, Ravi, I'm interested in your thoughts on this because I can't decide what I think about how to handle the continuing dialogue and the news like this that comes out about January 6th. Because on the one hand, I think historically it's super important. It is the, it's the defining moment of a generation and not in a good way. Now, 9/11 was a terrible tragedy, and yet in many ways was similarly a defining moment for our generation in a bad way. We ended up invading Iraq, which was the wrong country. But then there were also, for years after 9/11, there was a lot of unity for a few years in the country. There were people like myself and a lot of others who were called into the service. There were people like you who were called to serve in other ways. And then I feel terrible for like Generation Z that has January 6th as its sort of defining event. And I don't know what to do with it is that historically, I think it's super important that we continue to talk about it. And politically, I'm of two minds on how helpful it is to us, right? I feel like politically, a lot of people are like, okay, that happened. It doesn't affect my life anymore. And I don't want to talk. I don't want to hear about it. Right. And by a lot of people, I mostly mean persuadable voters. I feel like if January 6th were an event that we're going to persuade a lot of people, it probably did that in the midterms in 22. But by 24, it really wasn't having that effect anymore. And so I'm just not sure how to handle it.
Yeah, I know this podcast is about persuading people in your life, but obviously we've taken different tacks over the years. And I think my general posture in these early days of the Trump administration and through this podcast and other commentary is really just to take stock of what's happening and make sure that we organize it in our heads and for our listeners, right? Mm-hmm. And not ask, what is this going to do to the swing voter in Pennsylvania? And more just be like, we are here. We see it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to clock it if it's important, right? Like, as opposed to being like, hey, this thing is going to move somebody. It's more just like, hey, like we don't have elections for a while. There's so much happening that we use the limited time and audience that we have to say, let's hold this thing up. History, contemporary politics, everything. Like let's just put that in amber and say this happened so that everybody knows it happened, whether it's 100 years from now or at the midterms in the general election. We have clarified this for a certain group of people and for ourselves, and just make meaning from that. That's how I treat it.
It's a good point. And also the historical discussion isn't irrelevant because, when you think about the way, say, the Reagan years were remembered historically, the Republicans, fairly or unfairly, I would argue mostly unfairly, sort of won the historical argument over the Reagan years. And it greatly affected the politics of the 90s and early 2000s. And so placing events like January 6th and placing the Trump presidency in the proper context, whether you win in the elections that take place during that period or not, probably is pretty important for our politics 10, 15 years down the road.
Think about Monica Lewinsky, right? The Monica Lewinsky scandal happened in the second term of Clinton. He wasn't going to run again. And it seemed like Democrats had quote unquote won that narrative in the short term. Clinton became more popular. People were like, whatever. But then you had George W. Bush run on family values. So like, it's important to keep fighting the narrative because for elections, it matters, but also like, again, like it's about history and 50 years from now, you know, people are going to ask, wait, you just stopped talking about this crazy thing? Like, of course not. We keep talking about it. Raskin kept going because there's another piece of news here about a different January 6th rioter.
Well, a 33-year-old January 6th rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia.
I mean, I'm shocked.
Apparently there are a few of these cases. And like, this is, again, is like anytime listeners, you know, somebody mentions Democrats and recidivism, and look, there's a big debate there in New York. I think we've gone too far with the revolving door, people committing multiple crimes, in some cases, multiple heinous crimes, and still being on the streets committing more crimes, right? Anybody mentions that, it'd be like, hey, what about this thing right here? Because this seemed predictable. This guy shouldn't have gotten a pardon to begin with, and now he's out there smashing other windows in his neighborhood. That seems relevant.
Yeah. Doesn't seem like a political protest in this case. Not his statement was, I don't have enough stuff. I would like some of your stuff.
Right. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got a lot of news on the deportation front. And then we've got some 2024 look back stuff, starting with Biden's health, the Biden exposés, and then some data from Catalyst about how voters swung in the 2024 election. When we relaunched this podcast, it seemed like we had to figure it all out on our own. Scripts, setups, filming schedules, logos. It was super overwhelming. And every day it seemed like we had a new decision that needed a new answer. And when you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. The Midas Touch Network is proud to have their own store using the Shopify platform. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style, accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Now get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. You can easily create email and social media campaigns whenever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing, returns, and beyond. Turn your business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority, shopify.com/majority. For men, dealing with ED can be uncomfortable, which is why HIMS provides access to a comfortable solution with an online process and personalized treatment options. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable tablets, Viagra, and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% less. And the process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. You just fill out an intake form on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. And with hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/majority. HIMS.com/majority. That's HIMS.com/majority for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/majority. The featured products include compounded products which are not approved nor verified for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Well, it's important to note when we talk about the historical record that we still don't have remedies to most of these deportations and the lack of due process. There are still people sitting in prisons in El Salvador who have no, immediate hope for a remedy, even though the Supreme Court has essentially demanded Trump do so. He's still ignoring that ruling. So that's where we are right now. Meanwhile, our Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, was asked about habeas corpus. Let's go to this exchange.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas
right
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the live free or die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.
So, first of all, shout out to Maggie Hassan, who's an awesome senator and, fun fact, once taught me how to eat a lobster properly.
Overrated food, by the way, lobster. Too much work.
It is too much work, which is why somebody had to teach me how to do it.
Yeah.
But okay, my question for you, Ravi, is how old were you when you learned what habeas corpus was, and what part of school were you in?
I mean, the answer that would be helpful would be in high school, but I think I probably learned it in during the debates over the Afghan war, like around the Hamdan decision and stuff like that when I was in law school, if I'm being honest. Late.
Well, but like the first time you became aware of the concept was like high school history class, right? Studying.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have known the word, but the concept.
But if you were to become, say, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and one of your jobs was to detain people, you'd probably be familiar with the concept. I feel like I learned it in high school from Mr. Geocaris. Shout out to Jim Geocaris, my high school history and government teacher. And then, of course, I was a political science major. And then we went over it again. And then, of course, during law school. So I was curious. So I looked it up and, Kristi Noem, she left school. She left college in the 90s when she had her first child. And then she went back and she actually got a bachelor's degree in political science. And interestingly, she got that bachelor's degree in political science while she was a member of Congress, which means it was just a little over a decade ago. But what really bothers me is it's two things. One, the complete lack of curiosity about what this central principle of the American justice system is, but also just the absolute assumption that it is the total opposite of what it is. The idea that habeas corpus represents a fundamental right given to the president? Like, there are not very many fundamental rights given to the government in this country. That's kind of the whole damn point of America. The fundamental rights belong to the people, not to the government.
There's this phrase, knows enough to be dangerous, right? Which is usually meant colloquially, but in this case, she literally knows enough to be dangerous, which is what she knows is that Lincoln suspended habeas, which is a much debated historical fact. Now, what was going on at that time? Well, we were in a civil war. That's when he suspended habeas corpus. I think he had to.
Probably having trouble providing due process and a public reason for every single prisoner of the Confederacy that they took.
Yeah. We were in the middle of a war with each other. That's what was going on back then. Now, Trump and his minions, what they tend to do is find any bottom rung of American history, like whatever the worst moment we ever had was, and they want to like use that as their, standard operating procedure, right? It would be like, like getting in your relationship and canvassing every bad relationship that's ever existed and be like, you know what? Like, this is my standard. This is how I live every day. Bill Clinton got a blowjob from an intern in the Oval Office. So therefore, it's okay to philander with the people you're working with and lie to your wife. So that's a Tuesday for me. That's how the Trump administration views their job. And in this case, she's not wrong. And I think Hassan, like in the sense of not what she answered and what habeas is, but what I think she was trying to say, which is the president has the quote unquote right to suspend habeas, is a debated fact. And under this Supreme Court, she might find a receptive audience, but at least from 4 of them.
But she is, even giving her the benefit of the doubt, she's wrong. I mean, what she said was habeas corpus is the right of the president.
No, yeah, she's right. She's totally wrong about that.
Out of the country that he wants. And that's like not even in the same. It's not just like you got the right idea, but got it wrong. It's like we were talking about apples and she's talking about like sports. I mean, it's like they got nothing to do with each other.
Well, and to be clear, there have been subsequent Supreme Court decisions that included some of the members of this court that contradict her, like in basically say you can't suspend habeas. And it's one of those things
guy
where
who argued those in front of the Supreme Court was my national security law professor at Georgetown, David Cole.
Oh yeah, he's a baller, that guy.
Yeah.
Hamden decision, I think, right?
Yes, and can I tell you how odd it was to, by the way, be in his class? He was, I think, a lawyer for the ACLU at the time, and it was like a large, pretty decent class. There was probably 75 students in it. It was one of those ones where it was like stadium seating, and it was when I was in ROTC, and it happened to go right in my schedule. It happened to go right after like some training that I would do, in the mornings, and so to go to his class right after 9/11, or like a couple years after 9/11, on national security law, where he's talking about all these rights of people to not be detained indefinitely, and I'm showing up in fatigues every single day. It was just kind of an awkward thing. But anyway, I digress.
Well, on the deportations front, Van Hollen and his former Senate colleague, Marco Rubio, really went at it this week in hearings. We've got 2 clips here. Let's take the first one.
United States and study. And if you tell me that you're coming to the United States to lead campus crusades, to take over libraries and try to burn down buildings and acts of violence, we're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what Ms. Ostork did?
We're not going to give you a visa.
Is that what she did? Come on, Mr. Secretary.
And every single one of these cases, the factors are different.
Senator,
the bottom line is, if you're coming here to stir up trouble on our campuses, we will deny you a visa. And if you have a visa,
First Amendment apply to
we will
people
revoke
living in the United States?
And we're going to do more. There are more coming. We're going to continue to revoke the visas of people who are here as guests and are disrupting our higher education facilities. People are paying money. These kids pay money to go to school, and they have to walk through a bunch of lunatics
to the
who are here on student
newspapers
visas.
disrupting the
Simple
foreign
as
policy of the
that.
United
I want to
States.
do more. I hope we can
That's
find more of these people.
pathetic, Mr.
In fact, the other day, some guys led a riot. I forgot what university it was, and I asked, please, can you find the arrest records of all the people that were arrested at that riot at that campus? Because if any of them have a visa, we're going to revoke it.
I feel so much safer when you lock up people like Ms. Ostork, Ms. Secretary.
We've had enough time on the subject.
So that is interesting to watch, because those are 2 guys who, work together and
voted for him. Yeah. He voted for Rubio.
That was the idea. Was like, well, we'll get one semi-sane person in there. What is going on with Rubio here? Because he does seem like he believes in it right now. Is he
playing the part
himself, or?
You know how I feel about most politicians. you know, I think there have been studies on this, like by and large, no offense to you, you are an
No,
exception.
I'm a recovering politician.
They are nimble moral characters in many ways, and a lot of them are Machiavellians. And Rubio is has fully embraced the pursuit of power above the pursuit of any more morality or moral code. And the question is, did he ever have a moral code, or was that a game? Right. And in this case, if you look at the comments to this video and the one I'm about to play and the retweets and stuff like that, major figures of the right are retweeting it, being like, oh, look at Rubio 2.0. This guy's interesting. So he's playing the politics that J.D. Vance played, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what he's doing. Now, here's another clip where if you thought that one was heated, check this one out.
Well, a 33-year-old January...
The whole list. In the case of El Salvador, absolutely. Absolutely. We deported gang members, including the one you had a margarita with. And that guy is a human trafficker, and that guy is a gangbanger, and the evidence is going to be clear. In the days to come, you're going to see who you went to defend.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Rubio has the floor.
Mr. Chairman, he can't make unsubstantiated comments like that.
Secretary Rubio has the floor. You
Secretary
had your time.
Rubio should take that testimony to the federal court of the United States because he hasn't done it under oath.
Here's another point.
So here's what I would say about this, is that we live in an age where more than any other time, passion is persuasive because people are constantly searching for what the truth is and they don't know. And it's not like it used to be where you could grab on to Walter Cronkite, you could grab on to Peter Jennings, and you could say, well, whatever they say is probably the truth and we can all agree on it. We don't live in that era anymore. And so when we are trying to determine who is actually right, when two people are saying two completely opposite things that are not opinions, but are just completely opposite facts or reads of the facts, the human brain tends to go toward the person who seems like they believe it. And that's what Rubio is doing. Rubio is leaning into that and showing a lot of passion. And, you know, Rubio is not walking in there saying, well, you know, we're not sure about that guy. Rubio is completely ignoring the fact, as was pointed out, that he won't say this in court because there's no evidence for it. He's just leaning in and pretending it's true. But what I will credit Van Hollen with is Van Hollen is not backing down in either of those clips. Van Hollen understands that you have to meet that passion with equal passion. And he's letting himself get pissed. And that's also important because if you have the person questioning him trying to be senatorial in a way and trying to maintain a sense of decorum and composure in the face of ridiculous, terrible, libelous, slanderous things, then it seems like you're not as sure of yourself. And the only thing I would say is that instead of saying unsubstantiated without evidence, I just call them lies. But everything else Van Hollen did there is absolutely right, I think.
I also wonder, you know, it's funny you say that because I had a different instinct, although what I think you said is totally right. I was wondering, like, what would happen if Van Hollen was like, gave this sort of disappointed tone to it and was like, with the margarita comment, to go back to him and been like, you know, Senator Rubio, I've served with you before, and I voted for you. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing here with this margarita comment, that you know what you're doing? Like, you know it's false. You're trying to distract from this. That's not the Rubio I knew before. What's happened to you? Like, just...
Yeah, I think it could work. I think it could work. I think that the problem is that, one, I don't think you can engage the margarita comment because I think that's what Rubio wants. Rubio hangs it out there because he wants it to be a conversation about whether he just had a margarita with the guy. Like, right. Because Rubio is at that point, for anybody watching who is actually, you know, not already in one camp or the other, if you are a persuadable American watching that, then if you're Rubio, you're losing because you're saying stuff that is not true. And your argument that we're just going to go find more of these people, and yeah, you don't have any sort of First Amendment right whatsoever when you're in this country if you're not a U.S. citizen, like that's not what the law says. And so you would rather throw out that distraction. And I think, but I hear you. I think that in the room, I think that strategy would be more effective.
I think this is a lesson, Jason, that the vote should be no on every Trump nominee for anything. Yeah. Unless there's something extreme going on here, like they nominate Cory Booker for something. Like, right. these people are not to be trusted. You know, if this is what the guy who got the most votes looks like, come on.
Yeah, Rubio is clearly auditioning there. Not auditioning. He knows Trump's watching, and that's what this is all about. And it's sad because it's not what Rubio used to claim to be for, but we really don't ever know what the hell Rubio was ever for.
Right.
You know?
Well, on other deportation news, the Trump administration is now investing in self-deportation. So 64 people were self-deported on a government chartered flight this week as part of a new program in which immigrants are paid $1,000 in stipend to voluntarily leave the U.S. 19 of those passengers were children. It's an initiative called Project Homecoming.
Children who were U.S. citizens.
What do you say?
Children who were U.S. citizens.
Yeah, and this is a problem when your parents, are not. And this is coming amidst reports that the administration is behind on its mass deportation goals, which I think is a good thing that we should celebrate. Now, 64 is a drop in the bucket, but this could be a new tactic, new tool. And I think maybe the combination of people being sent to El Salvador gulags with the idea that you could get $1,000 and a plane ticket to avoid that fate could probably be enticing. And if I were an immigrant who is undocumented here in the United States, especially from any of the countries that are in the sort of sights of the administration, I would consider this, like if you don't want to wind up in El Salvador,
And let's think about why they're doing it. They're doing it purely to hit numbers that have no real purpose. Trump said there was going to be 1 million deported, right? And they're way behind on that. The other thing Trump said was that the only people that we're going to kick out are the ones who have committed crimes, right? And these people have not committed crimes. A huge amount of the people who they've, just picked up because they're undocumented or because, they're over on their visa, that kind of thing, or had a visa and they just took it away because of what they said. Those people are not criminals. Now, morally, going back to the historical argument, we absolutely should be talking about this and we should be noting it because it is wrong. In the political context, I think we need to start talking about the economic effects of this. Because the truth is that most people, even if they believe that immigration and undocumented migrants have hurt the economy, which a lot of really good economists say that actually that we would have labor shortages without them, the prices would be higher without them, they're doing a lot of things that American citizens don't want to do. Even if you look past that, most people can't explain why they say it is that way, right? They'll try and claim, oh, well, an immigrant took my job, but that's very rarely actually the case, right? I think it is time, with this much time before the midterms, to start tying it to prices and tying it to the economy. Because as Jared Polis told us last year when he came on the show, they are directly related.
Well, let's move on to 2024 and really start with Biden here, which I think everybody listening will know that he was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer. It sounds like what initially sounded like was that it could be, I don't know the proper term, but it could be so aggressive that
could be terminal.
Terminal is the word I'm looking for. But it seems like there are conflicting reports now, and that people are suggesting that they might be able to treat this, which is good news. Fox News, there's this Fox News clip basically that I think sums up generally the reaction that we're seeing from the right here.
Well, first, my heart goes out to the Bidens and the Biden family. Very unfortunate diagnosis, and we hope he beats it. But a lot of people are speculating whether this was medical malpractice or whether this was a medical cover-up. And we have every right to speculate because they have been caught in so many lies. Now, so the medical cover-up is not being said by Jesse Waters. It's being said all over the media by Democrats and by physicians. There's
generally, like as a rule, if you are talking about somebody's health and you say that you're expressing condolences to them and their family, it's good to just put a period at the end of that.
Yeah.
Sentence. It's not necessary, certainly, to then have a comma and then the word but. Like, just as a rule. Like, maybe take a breath, before you do that. But look, neither of us are doctors. I have, I've read both sides of the argument of whether or not this could have been present and they could have known while he was president. And I've seen other people say, no, this absolutely could have come on and not known about it while he was president. So the binary construction there of the question that Waters has done, which is that it is either medical malpractice or a cover-up, is complete BS, right? It could be either of those things, but it's not definitely either of those things. It could also be that they found it recently. That could easily be the case.
Have they answered that question, by the way? Has Biden's team said that they just discovered it? Because
I don't know.
I would take them at their word. I mean, I'm about to not be so kind to them, but if they came out and were like, we just found this out, which I imagine it would be. I mean, I don't know, but if I'm of the mind, first of all, I agree. Like, you just talk period, whatever. Obviously, it's a political podcast, so like on the frame of like how people are talking about this, I already am picking up in my life that quote unquote normal people are kind of speculating and doing another reason why this guy shouldn't have run again. And lots of people in my life, including Democrats, Independents, Republicans, are saying that. So that is a conversation happening out there in the community, which means,
and it's not completely, invalid. I mean, yeah, look, being in your 80s, what did David Axelrod call it on the show? The actuarial
reality.
Yeah, being in your 80s means you're more likely to be diagnosed with this sort of thing. So it's not a completely improper conversation in retrospect to say this is the kind of thing that makes people say somebody who, by the way, somebody Trump's age as well,
right,
should not be running.
I mean,
it's a fair thing to say, but it's just not. There's no point in saying it right now.
Yeah, and like, I think like we hope Biden is better. That's his first priority. They should clear this up. He's still a public figure. He's still doing interviews about politics, stuff like that. So he should probably enlighten us at some point if he hasn't done yet. By the time this goes out, it probably will. And despite all of the real problems with the way that they have communicated that White House towards the end, which we'll get to in a second, if they say they just discovered it, I'll take him at his word, unless somebody shows some evidence to suggest otherwise. And then you move on.
I'll tell you this. For all of the stuff that's come out about, the potential obfuscating about his health and that kind of thing in the first term, one thing I do not believe is that Joe Biden would have got a diagnosis like this and then said, I'm going to run again.
I tend to agree. I understand why people don't trust that, but I agree with you. It's also worth mentioning that Trump claims that he's like 6'5" and like 220 pounds or something.
Yeah. He claims he has the exact dimensions of Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
No, that's not a joke. He claims he is the same height and weight as Patrick Mahomes.
And in spring of 2018, Trump's physician's office was broken into, and the physician, people could read about that, and the records stolen, and timing was weird. The physician made a lot of accusations. I'll let people... and that came right after he said that Trump took a drug to promote his hair growth. I mean, suspicious to say the least. I'll take my tinfoil hat on that, but there's a lot of questions to answer here. But I think the Biden team has earned some skepticism around the general portrayal of his health. And there have been tons of books that are coming out now about this, and the New York Magazine did a good summary of it. I'll read an excerpt of this. It says, nearly a year after pressure from Democrats forced Mr. Biden to drop out of the presidential race, the book shows that the party remains unwilling to reckon publicly with its choice to back Mr. Biden as its nominee for as long as it did. The reluctance of many Democratic leaders and insiders to voice criticism without the cloak of anonymity, even after this devastating defeat, suggests a lasting fear of speaking out. It also points to an awareness that saying now that Mr. Biden should not have run in 2024 could prompt questions about why they said nothing when it mattered. So basically they're saying a lot of people are still wanting to go anonymous for these books. I don't know why they're giving people the cloak of anonymity to talk about this kind of stuff. But there are some really damning stories. One of which that stood out to me is that Biden went to this fundraiser that George Clooney did for him.
Clooney wrote about this.
Didn't recognize George Clooney. And it's like one thing to not recognize George Clooney, period, but it's another thing to also not recognize George Clooney when he's doing your fundraiser. And it's in line with a lot of anecdotes about him not recognizing AIDS and things like that. And it's not great. And we had a lot of discussions. For people who are new to this podcast, we were pretty early on having pretty candid conversations about Biden and his age, whether he should run or not. We had them throughout the course of the election, like early in the primaries, during the primaries, towards the end of it. Caught some ire for it. I'm not claiming there's any one truth on this, but I do think this adds to the historical record in ways that I don't think make the president look really good, or the former president.
Yeah, I think if there's a lesson to be taken from it, it's that I think, you and I we were some of the first, like, once the dam started to break, it was basically after that debate. You and I were among the first wave to talk about it publicly, like the night of the debate. And, the reason that people didn't come out and say much about it before that, although you had been saying some things, I had not.
Yeah, I started in the fall, if you remember saying.
No, you were out ahead of it. You and my wife were both in my ear saying the same thing. And I what I will say is that, and I think the lesson learned is that if you assume that no matter what you say, it won't change anything, then you go to, well, then if I say anything, it'll only hurt us politically. And I guess the lesson there is, like, no, if you feel like you need to say something, it's better to go through the exercise as a party of saying something and then having the conversation, because it's probably going to be an issue regardless. And so I guess that's the lesson to be taken from it.
Yeah. I don't have the energy for, like, the big debate on this anymore, because there's nothing we could do about it, and my hope is, like, when things like Fetterman come up, as we talked about, it's like, you've got to take the lesson and move forward and say, like, what are the things we need to be honest about today, moving forward,
right?
And how do we learn from it, and how do we hold our opposition to the standard that they claim we should be adhering to here, which is transparency about your health, and also honest conversations about age and public office. And those are inconvenient realities for them too.
Look, it enhances your credibility on all other arguments. And when you just call it like you see it. I do think, as a sort of kind of a sidebar to this, is that we are looking at a moment where each of the two parties have an opportunity to position themselves as the party of young people and the party of the next generation. And that does come around every few elections. And right now, I do think the Republicans have a little bit of an edge on us on that. But I think there is an opportunity, if we are to, we had Jake Rakove on the show. There are some younger candidates now. I think there is an opportunity to demonstrate that there's a youth movement in the country and that it is with the Democrats. I do think that would be persuasive, not just for young voters, but for everybody. I mean, I can remember when the first time I was running for office, I was 26 years old when I started knocking on doors to run for the state legislature. And I remember going into it with a lot of trepidation, thinking people would think I was way too young. And it turned out to be the exact opposite. So many people in their 60s, 70s, 80s would say to me at the door, "Well, I really like how young you are," and would just flat out tell me, "I'm going to vote for you because we need more young people doing this. My generation has had its chance," and I think there is real power in that.
Well, one last piece on this is Catalyst, which is an organization that parses data, and they go through all the voter files and everything, has some interesting data about swings from the 2020 to the 2024 election. And let's throw this graphic up. It's very fine-tuned, but the basic story here is at the top of this graph, you basically have Latino men, non-college educated, Black non-college educated men, swinging 20 plus points in these polls.
Which is not to say that the Republicans are winning them by 20 plus points, but
just a swing.
20 plus point swing and difference.
And I think this is important to keep in mind when we think about who it is that could swing back to us and win us the election next time, either in the midterm or the general election. And I think of this as it relates to certain issues that the power base of our party tends to be affluent white progressives. Every city has an Upper West Side, a Park Slope, that neighborhood you and I were in St. Louis, or like East Nashville, and like those folks have a set of values and certain beliefs about where the party should go. They also tend to be more susceptible to kind of like faddish ideas. And like I think some of the conversations around what to do about racism after 2020 is like those are the type of people that are going to be like about Ibram Kendi, but probably not really have a lot to say about what we should do to improve our K-12 school systems in ways that people on the ground who attend schools that they're not satisfied with are demanding of us. And so this screams to me that we should be careful about the places that we go and who we talk to and who represents the party and who doesn't, because the stakes are very high here in terms of like what policies we elevate, what stories we elevate, and even what candidates we elevate.
It's interesting that, and this shouldn't be a shock, but that the voters who are most up for grabs for both sides are the voters who are most immediately affected by policies put in by an administration, right? So the voters that were most immediately affected by inflation, whether you blame Biden for that or not, they did, and then they voted accordingly, right? But those same voters are going to be the ones who could most immediately be affected by tariffs, right? And then the voters who are more in a steady state of their lives, regardless of who's in office, are the voters who have the luxury of voting on ideology and that sort of thing. And who does that tend to be? Like, that tends to be, educated, affluent folks. They tend to say, well, I'm coming from this more enlightened point of view, so I'm always going to be for the liberals, no matter what the economy is doing, no matter, right? And then you've got folks who are also very affluent and might also be highly educated, but they're, say, in the corporate sector, and they've always been in the corporate sector, and they live in the suburbs, and they just don't, they've never wanted their taxes to be higher for any purpose, and they still don't, right?
Right.
And then they look at people who they've not spent time around, mostly people of color, and they see them as the opposite of themselves, right? And so those two groups of affluent people are pretty much going to vote the way that they vote. And then you have and this is actually, I think, encouraging in a way. And then you have this, it used to be that then the people who were most at the whim of policies understood that the Democrats were going to be better for them because they had policies that were better for working people. And then what the Republicans have done is they've gone in and they've really muddied that whole argument by introducing the idea that it's something other than economic policies that's hurting you. It's the instinct to be more inclusive and to help other people, and to give people, an opportunity to have a hand up, that all of a sudden that's what's hurting you. And that's what the argument is over. And so if we can win that argument, we're going to win those people back.
Yeah, I think like something you said, it really reminds me. There's the phrase luxury beliefs, right? You're talking about the luxury, right? The white progressives tend to have luxury beliefs. Like you can only pearl clutch if you have pearls, right? It's like whereas the populations that we're talking about, and I served a lot of them as a school principal, it's that they're actually more culturally conservative than people give them credit for. They're more likely to be going to church. They might have more mixed views on things like even homosexuality, but certainly when things like the way that Democrats talk about the trans issues or naming.
Can I just interrupt you and say, in 2018, I think it was 2018, when Senator Joe Donnelly was running for re-election in Indiana, he asked me to come and campaign with him. And I did a whole campaign swing with him, and we started the morning, and I had seen this in Black churches in Kansas City and St. Louis as well. But I really remember this. We started the morning in a Black church in, I think, Indianapolis, and it was a sermon. And the first 30 minutes of the sermon it was just the pastor talking about how boys are boys and girls are girls, and we know that. And the audience was not like bothered by it. So like we shouldn't assume that because people as a demographic tend to vote one way that they have embraced everything that that party stands for. It's not the case. This is why these things are called wedge issues.
Well, you remember the they them ad? Who was in that ad?
Right.
Charlemagne,
Yeah.
the black radio host, who actually is I think a Kamala supporter or very friendly to Kamala, but they took this clip where he was like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
And what I'm not saying is I'm not making a statement about the underlying rights of trans people. What I'm making a statement about is the amount of bandwidth you give to it, and how much work you need to do to show people what your priorities are. Because I think the real devastating effect of that ad was not that the average person sitting there really cared whether
they weren't like, I disagree with the Democrats on this. They were just like, the Republicans did a good job of making everybody think that's all we were talking about.
Yeah.
When in reality, it was just the Republicans saying that's all we were talking about.
Yeah, I think she's for they, them. What does that mean? Well, it just means that that's her priority. They're trying to say that. Now, I don't think that's actually true that that was her priority, but what they were saying was they were grabbing on something that people find true about somebody in their lives, right? And I think it shows up in subtle ways about how do people spend their time? What issues do they think are important? How do they ask you to declare your pronouns? How much of a big deal do they make out of the bathrooms and things like this? And it's like, and at various points, you and I have taken these debates very seriously. But I think what we need to learn from this data is if you lead with those issues, which is your prerogative, right? And you give them a lot of oxygen, and there's many versions of those issues. You are communicating something to the voters about your priorities, not about your underlying values, but about what your priorities are. And you need to be careful to demonstrate to the people that you need that your priorities are them and their lives first and foremost.
Yeah, and to be clear, like I don't think it means that we should have any position that's any different than what we have on the equality of all people. Like I think we should stay very dedicated to it. I know you think the same thing. And it's not, and I don't think we're not saying so we should never talk about it. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we should have a basic frame for what we believe in, and everything should come back to that. And for me, for a long time, everybody's heard me say that my frame as somebody who lives in the Midwest is that we want our families to be happy, healthy, safe, and nearby. And that the nearby could be about making sure that there are good jobs available there, that kind of thing. But that way, no matter what question you are being asked, including if you're being asked a question about trans rights, you can say, well, I want to make sure the trans people have a right to be happy, healthy, safe, and nearby their families. And because that's what I want. And that's also why I have the same policy with regard to student loans, why I have the policy that I do with regard, you name the issue. It's because I want families to be happy, healthy, safe, and nearby and not have to go elsewhere to find those things.
I'm really curious to see how Pete is going to handle these questions in all of his like media tours. I have not, he might have been asked. I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen him asked about this, and I'm curious to see what he's going to say.
I've heard him talk we're going to find out because I talked to him a couple of weeks ago coming on the show, and he said he's just got a big pile up of obligations right now. But
he doesn't want to speak to the choir. I get it. He wants to.
He's doing a good job of not doing that. But he's a friend of ours, so he'll be on here at some point in the next few months, I'm sure.
I suspect what his answer will do is preserve his core beliefs, which I assume is fairly pro-trans rights. And I know that means a lot of things for different people. What I mean by that is probably different than what other people might think of that. But like, I think what I suspect he'll say is he'll preserve his core beliefs, but signal, look, like there's no reason why you should care what my position is, because there's nothing I believe that is going to in any way make your life worse. Like, I believe in protecting their rights, but none of that's going to stop me from waking up every day to make the country more affordable to you, to make sure that you're treated with dignity, that you're, and even if you disagree with me, I'm not going to call you a bigot, because, Barack Obama wasn't even for gay marriage, until the end of his term. So like, I understand that people move at different paces of this, and I don't even presume to have a monopoly on truth. I imagine he'll say something like that.
Yeah. Look, I think I still come back, even though I know the term woke is no longer in vogue. I still come back to the saying that the woke need to make room for the still waking. And I think that the way to handle this has always been look, I want to fight for everybody. Yeah, that includes people, trans Americans. I want to make sure that they have every opportunity that they should have, just like I want to do the same for you. And I don't see the two things conflicting at all. And it's just like I care about them for the same reason I care about you. It reminds me of, and I've cited this example before, toward the end of the 2016 election, President Obama, by I think executive order, or maybe it was a rule of the Department of Education, said that bathrooms, that public schools had to make accommodations in bathrooms for trans kids. And it happened in October of the election year. And I had, been pretty loyal to the things that Obama had believed in, because I believed in him too. And a lot of prognosticators were like, well, this is the moment where Kander has no choice. He has to break with Obama on this because the election is in like 3 weeks. And what I said was, look, I don't think it's right to discriminate against other people's kids. And I don't think that's what we do in Missouri. So we won't be doing that. Like, I'm not going to be in favor of discriminating against your kids or anybody else's. And the reason I tell that story is because what I did there is I said, I agree with Barack Obama on this and I support the policy, but I said it the way somebody from Missouri would say it, which is it's wrong to discriminate against children. And so I won't be doing that. And I don't know why anybody else would want to. And what I did is I put my opponent ended up not even answering it, because I put him in a position where if he was going to take the opposing position, he had to be in favor of discriminating against other people's kids. And that's not where you want to be. So it became sort of a non-issue. And, we didn't win, but we, as is well known, we outperformed everybody running in a race like that across the country. So, because that's how we handled stuff like that. I'm sure that's how Pete will handle that kind of thing.
Well, let's get to one for us. Have you ever watched this British baking show?
No, but I saw on Instagram the other day that you've been sucked in.
I forget what it's called. It's like the something baking show.
It's like the Great British
Baking Show.
Yeah.
Man, the show is awesome. I accidentally stumbled upon this show, and now it's taken over my life. It's like incredible. Basically, like 12 bakers or something, like amateur bakers, get into tent, and every week somebody's voted out of the tent, and you do 3 different over the course of a weekend. So they meet every weekend over the course of the season, and you do 3 different, usually, anywhere from like 2 to 5 hour bakes, right? And bakes could be, you can do a cake, you can do cookies, you could even do pizza at certain points, bread. And man, let me tell you, like, it's mesmerizing. It's like a sport. I almost wanted to bring it to the sports pod because I was going to argue that it's a sport.
Well, let's do that this next week. Or I guess we're not on this next week, but the week after.
But it's also like, it is like, they're so kind to each other. Like, if somebody finishes early, like, they go and help the other person. And when they, the season that I watched, at the end of it, they're down to 3 people and they compete against each other. And these people are close at this point. They're spending every weekend together over the course of like a half a year. And they're like crying for each other. Like, it's like crazy. And they become like close friends afterwards. All that. It's just like very moving. Like, the show is very moving.
Sounds very wholesome.
Very moving show. And it makes you, I'm not a sweets person. And it honestly made me consider wanting to make baking one of my focus years, because I was like, I respect the game. This is hard stuff, man. These people are very impressive. Very impressive.
Well, speaking of like content and screens and being sucked into things, I made, True and Bella are now on summer vacation. And True has, over the last year or so, become very into Fortnite because he has like two major friend groups, right? He has like his baseball team, which the vast majority of which he do not go to his school because it's like a club team, and there's 2 kids on the team that go to his school. And he plays Fortnite sometimes with those kids on the team, but then he has these other 3 friends from his school who are kind of like his tightest, like everyday friends. And and one of the ways that they hang out together when they're not together is they play Fortnite together, and they have like an open channel Zoom set up so they can talk to each other. And I've been really of like 2 minds of what to do about this, right? Because on the one hand, like, I don't want my kid to get over, I don't want to overdo it on screens. And on the other, I recognize that like we live in a neighborhood where there really aren't any other kids who go to his school. And there's very few kids in this neighborhood, just as it is right now. It's an older neighborhood. There's very few kids his age in the neighborhood. And like I grew up in, and I know you grew up in a neighborhood where like it was, during summer, certainly it was like the day started and you just went outside and you're with your friend. Now we also didn't have like these incredible gaming systems, but you went outside, you were with your friends all day, and then you just kind of came home for the meals, but I want him to have that experience of constantly socializing with others. So I've been really trying to figure out like how much of this do I let him do? And so the other day I put in a rule, and the rule was, and so the other thing going on is that True has a tendency to wake up at 6 or 6:30 every morning, regardless of what day of the week it is. And then he'll get behind on sleep. And so the other day I was like, okay, from now, this whole summer, you cannot turn on a screen device prior to 8 a.m. And this was a mini-sized negotiation, not negotiation, argument with True. Because he was saying like, I'm going to be so bored in the mornings. And I was like, well, I'm trying to train your body to not feel like I got to get up and get started on screens. I want you
Also,
to sleep
being bored
longer.
is good.
And being bored is good. And that's going to be the point of this story. You nailed it, because his body he's abiding by it. And his body is not adapted to sleeping in longer. But this morning I got up and it was 7 a.m. And I come walking out into the living room, and there's True sitting there reading a hardback book, a hardcover book by this author that he likes called Alan Gratz, who writes like young adult stuff. And it's historical fiction that he writes. And he's reading a book called Refugee, which is the story of 3 child refugees intertwining over time, their stories. And I'm like, how long have you been up? And he's like 45 minutes. And I'm like, how far are you into that book? He's like, I've read 70 pages. And he's pissed, right? Like he's irritated at me, but he's sitting there and reading the book. And I bring this up only to say, like, man, do I feel like I am nailing it as a parent today. Now,
start adding hours to that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. The moment that the clock hit 8 a.m., he was upstairs logging on to talk to his friends and play Fortnite. But still, I feel like a victory. And then you know what he did today? Because he didn't start the day just by plugging his brain into a screen. Diana said, hey, I'm going on a 2-mile run like this afternoon. Do you want to go with me? And he's like, yeah. And he just like went on a 2-mile run with Diana. And of course came back and was not even winded because he's, 11. But yeah, so I feel like big win today.
Well, you remind me of the first, I love that. And you should start sneaking more hours into that. But I think
I will, hopefully.
Shout out, by the way, to listeners who came out to Staten Island when I did this Barnes & Noble event. There were multiple, majority 54 people who came. And one of the people who came was the mother of this sort of main character, sidekick to mine, this character Val in the book. And she was taught, one of the things one of the main goals for, and this is Garbage Town for new listeners, you should go out and get it. It's a novel that just came out about a month and a half ago.
Very good book.
And I was worried about her son, who's like, inspires one of the main characters. And I was worried that he wasn't going to like it, but she said to me at the Barnes and Noble, she was like, he finished the book and he started crying. He was so moved by it. So that was like the ultimate validation.
That's amazing. That's really cool, man.
And my uncle just finished it too, who's also inspires one of the characters, and he loved it too. That was great to hear.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. Well, okay, go buy the book. Go buy Garbage Town. Also, we're not going to do The Game Within, our sports and politics show, next week because it would fall on Memorial Day. So we're going to skip a week, but then we'll be back the following week. But you can go back on YouTube and find The Game Within. There's lots of great episodes of it. It streams live at 2:30 Central Time on Mondays, drops on audio on Monday evenings. So thanks everybody for listening here. I'm at Jason Kander everywhere. Ravi is at Ravi Gupta everywhere. Please leave a 5-star review for Majority 54. And thank you to the Mightiest Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.